Okay, we are about to embark on Robinson Crusoe, Chapter 7. But I thought I should first maybe make a note about the chapters in Robinson Crusoe. Because you see, in the version, the full-length version, the ebook that I have, there are no chapters. Which means that essentially any chapters in any version of Robinson Crusoe that you will come across today will have been superimposed on the book after the fact. Sort of like the Bible, where the Bible has been broken up into chapters and verses to make it easier to find and to reference. Robinson Crusoe has been broken up into chapters because that is what is usually done in novels today. If you recall, Robinson Crusoe is considered one of the first English novels. It was, to use a terrible pun, novel at the time to write a novel. Full-length versions of Robinson Crusoe are often broken down into 31 chapters. Our short abridged version is in 14 chapters, and we are about to start chapter 7, which means theoretically by the time we are complete, this chapter is completed, we are approximately halfway through the book. Not quite really, but yes, it is just chapter 7 in the version that we have, not necessarily chapter 7 as Robinson Crusoe would have originally written it. My hair is doing something funky today, but that's all right. Okay, so we are about to start rushing through time here a little. I cannot say that after this, for 5 years, any extraordinary thing happened to me, but I lived on in the same course, in the same posture and place, just as before. So by posture, he means kind of like in the same spiritual, emotional, physical condition. The chief things I was employed in, besides my yearly labor of planting my barley and rice and curing my raisins, of both which I always kept up just enough to have sufficient. My version says sufficient, but I think they mean sufficient stock of 1 year's provision beforehand. I say, besides this yearly labor and my daily labor of going out with my gun, I had one labor, to make me a canoe. And though I was near 2 years about it, yet I never grudged my labor in hopes of having a boat to go off to sea at last. However, though my little canoe was finished, yet the size of it was not at all answerable to the design which I had in view of venturing over the terra firma, where it was above 40 miles abroad. Accordingly, the smallness of my boat assisted to put an end to that design, and now I thought no more of it. But as I had a boat, my next design was to make a tour round the island, for as I had been on the other side in one place, crossing, as I have already described it, over land, so the discoveries I made in that little journey made me very eager to see other parts of the coast, and now I had a boat. I thought of nothing but sailing round the island. For this purpose, that I might do everything with discretion and consideration, I fitted up a little mast to my boat and made a sail to it out of some of the pieces of the ship's sail, which lay in store, and of which I had great stock by me. Having fitted my mast and sail and tried the boat, I found she would sail very well. Then I made little lockers or boxes at either end of my boat to put provisions, necessaries, and ammunitions into, to be kept dry, either from rain or the spray of the sea, and a little long hollow place I cut in the inside of the boat, where I could lay my gun, making a flap to hang down over it to keep it dry. I fixed my umbrella also in a step at the stern like a mast to stand over my head, and keep the heat of the sun off me like an awning, and thus I every now and then took a little voyage upon the sea, but never went far out, nor far from the little creek. But at last, being eager to view the circumference of my little kingdom, I resolved upon my tour, and accordingly I victualled my ship for the voyage, which basically means he's stocked it up with food. I victualled my ship for the voyage, putting in 24 of my loaves, cakes I should rather call them, or barley bread, an earthen pot full of parched rice, a food I ate a great deal of, a little bottle of rum, half a goat, and powder and shot for killing more. It was the 6th of November in the 6th year of my reign, or my captivity, which you please, that I set out on this voyage, and I found it much longer than I expected, for though the island itself was not very large, yet when I came to the east side of it, I found a great ledge of rock stretching above 2 leagues into the sea, some above water, some under it, and beyond that a shoal of sand lying dry half a league more, so that I was obliged to go a great way out to sea to double the point. When I first discovered them, I was going to give over my enterprise and come back again, not knowing how far it might oblige me to go out to sea, and above all, doubting how I should get back again. So I came to anchor, for I had made me a kind of anchor with a piece of a broken grapnel which I got out of the ship. Having secured my boat, I took my gun and went on shore, climbing up upon a hill which seemed to overlook that point, where I saw the full extent of it, and resolved to venture. In my viewing the sea from that hill where I stood, I perceived a strong and indeed a most furious current, which ran to the east and even came close to the point, and I took the more notice of it because I saw there might be some danger, and when I came into it I might be carried out to sea by the strength of it, and not be able to make the island again. And indeed, had I not first gone up this hill, I believe it would have been so, for there was the same current on the other side of the island, only that it set off at a farther distance, and I saw there was a strong eddy under the shore. So I had nothing to do but to get in out of the first current, and I should presently be in an eddy. So I had nothing to do but to get in out of the first current, and I should be presently in an eddy. I lay here, however, 2 days, because the wind blowing pretty fresh at east-southeast, and that being just contrary to the said current, made a great breaking of the sea upon the point, so that it was not safe for me to keep too close to the shore for the breakers, nor to go too far off because of the stream. The 3rd day in the morning, the wind having abated overnight, the sea was calm, and I ventured. But I am a warning again to all rash and ignorant pilots, for no sooner was I come to the point when even I was not my boat's length from the shore. For no sooner was I come to the point when even I was not my boat's length from the shore, but I found myself in a great depth of water, and a current like the sluice of a mill. It carried my boat along with it with such violence that all I could do could not keep her so much as on the edge of it. But I found it hurried me farther and farther out from the eddy, which was on my left hand. There was no wind stirring to help me, and all I could do with my paddles signified nothing. And now I began to give myself over for lost. For as the current was on both sides of the island, I knew in a few leagues' distance they must join again, and then I was irrevocably. I've always found that word very difficult to say. And then I was irrecoverably there. And then I was irrecoverably gone, nor did I see any possibility of avoiding it, so that I had no prospect before me but of perishing, not by the sea, for that was calm enough, but of starving for hunger. I had indeed found a tortoise on the shore, as big almost as I could lift, and had tossed it into the boat, and I had a great jar of fresh water, that is to say, one of my earthen pots. But what was all this to being driven into the vast ocean, where, to be sure, there was no shore, no mainland or island, for 1,000 leagues at least? It is scarce possible to imagine the consternation I was now in, being driven from my beloved island, for so it appeared to me now to be, into the wide ocean, almost 2 leagues, and in the utmost despair of ever recovering it again. However, I worked hard, till indeed my strength was almost exhausted, and kept my boat as much to the northward, that is, towards the side of the current which the eddy lay on, as possibly I could. When about noon, as the sun passed the meridian, I thought I felt a little breeze of wind in my face, springing up from the south-southeast. This cheered my heart a little, especially when in about half an hour or more it blew a pretty small, gentle gale. By this time I was a frightful distance from the island, and had the least cloud of hazy weather intervened, I had been undone another way too, for I had no compass on board, and should never have known how to have steered towards the island if I had but once lost sight of it. But the weather continued clear. I applied myself to get up my mast again and spread my sail, standing away to the north as much as possible to get out of the current. Just as I had set my mast and sail and the boat began to stretch away, I saw even by the clearness of the water some alteration of the current was near, for where the current was so strong, the water was foul. But perceiving the water clear, I found the current abate, and presently I found to the east, at about half a mile, a breaking of the sea upon some rocks. These rocks I found caused the current to part again, and as the main stress of it ran away more southerly, leaving the rocks to the northeast, so the other returned by the repulse of the rocks, and made a strong eddy, which ran back again to the northwest with a very sharp stream. They who know what it is to have a reprieve brought to them upon the scaffold, or to be rescued from thieves just about to murder them, or who have been in such like extremities, may guess what my present joy was, and how gladly I put my boat into the stream of this eddy, and the wind also freshening, how gladly I spread my sail to it, running cheerfully before the wind, with a strong tide or eddy underfoot. This eddy carried me about a league in my way, back again directly towards the island, but about 2 leagues more to the northward than the current which carried me away at first, so that when I came near the island, I found myself open to the northern shore of it, that is to say, the other end of the island opposite to that which I went out from. When I had made something more than a league of way by the help of this current or eddy, I found it was spent and served me no farther. However, I found that being between the 2 great currents, that on the south side which had hurried me away, and that on the north which lay about a league on the other side, I say, between these 2, in the wake of the island, I found the water at least still, and running no way, and having still a breeze of wind fair for me, I kept on the steering directly for the island, though not making such fresh way as I did before. About 4 o'clock in the evening, being then within about a league of the island, I found the point of the rocks which occasioned this disaster, stretching out as it is described before to the southward, and casting off the current more southwardly, had of course made another eddy to the north, and this I found very strong, but not directly setting the way my course lay, which was due west, but almost full north. However, having a fresh wind, I stretched across this eddy slanting northwest, and in about an hour came within about a mile of the shore, where, it being smooth water, I soon got to land. When I was on shore, I fell on my knees and gave God thanks for my deliverance, resolving to lay aside all thoughts of my deliverance by my boat, and refreshing myself with such thoughts as I had, I brought my boat close to the shore in a little cove that I had spied under some trees, and lay down to sleep, being quite spent with the labor and fatigue of the journey. I was now at a great loss which way to get home with my boat. I had run so much hazard and knew too much to think of attempting it by the way I went out, and what might be at the other side, I mean the west side, I knew not, nor had I any mind to run any more ventures, so I only resolved in the morning to make my way westward along the shore, to see if there was no creek where I might lay up my frigate in safety, so as to have her again if I wanted her, in about 3 miles or thereabout, coasting the shore. I came to a very good inlet or bay about a mile over, which narrowed till it came to a very little rivulet or brook, where I found a very convenient harbour for my boat, and where she lay as if she had been in a little dock made on purpose for her. Here I put in, and having stowed my boat very safe, I went on shore to look about me, and to see where I was. I soon found I had but a little passed by the place where I had been before, when I travelled on foot to that shore. So taking nothing out of my boat but my gun and my umbrella, for it was exceeding hot, I began my march. The way was comfortable enough, after such a voyage as I had been upon, and I reached my old bower in the evening, where I found everything standing as I left it, for I always kept it in good order, being, as I said before, my country house. I got over the fence and laid me down in the shade to rest my limbs, for I was very weary and fell asleep. But judge you, if you can, that read my story, what a surprise I must be in when I was waked out of my sleep by a voice calling me by my name several times. Robin! 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 Robin Crusoe! Oh, I'm sorry. Poor Robin Crusoe! Where are you, Robin Crusoe? Where are you? Where have you been? I was so dead asleep at first, being fatigued with rowing the first part of the day and with walking the latter part, that I did not wake thoroughly, but dozing between sleeping and waking, thought I dreamed that somebody spoke to me. But as the voice continued to repeat, Robin Crusoe, Robin Crusoe, at last I began to wake more perfectly, and was at first dreadfully frightened, and started up in the utmost consternation. But no sooner were my eyes opened than I saw my Paul sitting on the top of the hedge, and immediately knew that it was he that spoke to me, for just in such bemoaning language I had used to talk to him and teach him, and he had learned it so perfectly that he would sit upon my finger and lay his bill close to my face and cry, Poor Robin Crusoe, where are you? Where have you been? How come you here? And such things as I had taught him. However, even though I knew it was the parrot, and that indeed it could be nobody else, it was a good while before I could compose myself. First, I was amazed how the creature got thither, and then how he should just keep about the place and nowhere else. But as I was well satisfied it could be nobody but honest Paul, I got it over, and holding out my hand and calling him by his name, Paul, the sociable creature, came to me and sat upon my thumb, as he used to do, and continued talking to me. Poor Robin Crusoe, and how did I come here, and where had I been? Just as if he had been overjoyed to see me again, so I carried him home along with me. I had now had enough of rambling to sea for some time, and had enough to do for many days to sit still, and reflect upon the danger I had been in. I would have been very glad to have had my boat again on my side of the island, but I knew not how it was practicable to get it about. As to the east side of the island, which I had gone round, I knew well enough there was no venturing that way. My very heart would shrink, and my very blood run chill, but to think of it. And as to the other side of the island, I did not know how it might be there, but supposing the current ran with the same force against the shore as at the east as it passed by it on the other, I might run the same risk of being driven down the stream and carried by the island, as I had been before of being carried away from it. So with these thoughts I contented myself to be without any boat, though it had been the product of so many months' labor to make it, and of so many more to get it unto the sea. Just drink. In this government of my temper I remained near a year, lived a very sedate, retired life, as you may well suppose, my thoughts being very much composed as to my condition, and fully comforted in resigning myself to the dispositions of Providence. I thought I lived really very happily in all things, except that of society. I improved myself in this time in all the mechanic exercises which my necessities made me apply myself to, and I believe could, upon occasion, make a very good carpenter, especially considering how few tools I had. I began now to perceive my powder abated considerably, and this was a want which it was impossible for me to supply, and I began seriously to consider what I must do when I should have no more powder, that is to say, how I should do to kill any goat. I had, as is observed in the 3rd year of my being here, kept a young kid, and bred her up tame, and I was in hope of getting a he-goat, but I could not by any means bring it to pass, till my kid grew an old goat, and I could never find it in my heart to kill her, till she died at last of sheer age. But being now in the 11th year of my residence, and as I have said, my ammunition growing low, I set myself to study some art to trap and snare the goats, to see whether I could not catch some of them alive, and particularly I wanted a she-goat great with young. To this purpose I made snares to hamper them, and I do believe they were more than once taken in them, but my tackle was not good, for I had no wire, and I always found them broken, and my bait devoured. At length I resolved to try a pitfall, so I dug several large pits in the earth, in places where I had observed the goats used to feed, and over these pits I placed hurdles of my own making too, with a great weight upon them, and several times I put ears of barley and dry rice without setting the trap, and I could easily perceive that the goats had gone in and eaten up the corn, for I could see the mark of their feet. At length I set 3 traps in one night, and going the next morning I found them all standing, yet the bait eaten and gone. This was very discouraging. However, I altered my trap, and not to trouble you with particulars, going one morning to see my trap, I found in one of them a large he-goat, and in one of the other three kids, a male, and 2 females. So he's got quite a few now. As to the old one, I knew not what to do with him. He was so fierce, and I dared not go into the pit to him. That is to say, to go about to bring him away alive, which was what I wanted. I could have killed him, but that was not my business, nor would it answer my end. So I let him out, and he ran away as if he had been frightened out of his wits. But I had forgotten then what I learnt afterwards, that hunger will tame a lion. If I had let him stay there 3 or 4 days without food, and then had carried him some water to drink, and then a little corn, he would have been as tame as one of the kids, for they are mighty tractable creatures where they are well used. However, for the present I let him go, knowing no better at the time. Then I went to the 3 kids, and taking them one by one, I tied them with strings together, and with some difficulty brought them all home. It was a good while before they would feed, but throwing them some sweet corn, it tempted them, and they began to be tame. And now I found that if I expected to supply myself with goat flesh when I had no powder or shot left, breeding some up tame was my only way, when perhaps I might have them about my house like a flock of sheep. In about 1.5 years I had a flock of about 12 goats, kids and all, and in 2 years more I had 3 and 40, besides several that I took and killed for my food. And after that I enclosed 5 separate pieces of ground to feed them in, with little pens to drive them into, to take them as I wanted, and gates out of one piece of ground into another. But this was not all, for now I not only had goat's flesh to feed on when I pleased, but milk too, a thing which indeed in my beginning I did not so much as think of, and which, when it came into my thoughts, was really an agreeable surprise. So he seems a little slow in the uptake here, because I hear goats and I think goat's milk, but I guess not so common then? I don't know. It's not particularly common now, but you can still purchase goat's milk in some grocery stores. For now I set up my dairy, and had sometimes 1 gallon or 2 of milk in a day, and as nature, who gives supplies of food to every creature, dictates even naturally how to make use of it, so I that had never milked a cow, much less a goat, or seen butter or cheese made, very readily and handily, though after a great many essays and miscarriages, made me both butter and cheese at last, and never wanted it afterwards. I was rather impatient, as I have observed, to have the use of my boat, though very loath to run any more hazards, and therefore sometimes I sat contriving ways to get her about the island, and at other times I sat myself down contented enough without her. But I had a strange uneasiness in my mind to go down to the point of the island where, as I have said in my last ramble, I went up the hill to see how the shore lay, and how the current set. Then I might see what I had to do. This inclination increased upon me every day, and at length I resolved to travel thither by land, following the edge of the shore. I did so, but had anyone in England been to meet such a man as I was, it must either have frightened them or raised a great deal of laughter, for apart from my crudely made goatskin clothes, on my travels I always carried pouches hung on a belt around my shoulder. At my back I carried my basket, on my shoulder my gun, and over my head a great clumsy, ugly, goatskin umbrella, but which, after all, was the most necessary thing I had about me, next to my gun. My beard I had once allowed to grow till it was about 1/4 yard long, but as I had both scissors and razors sufficient, I had cut it pretty short, except what grew on my upper lip, which I had trimmed into a large pair of whiskers. Of these mustachios, or whiskers, I will not say that they were long enough to hang my hat upon them, but they were of a length and shape monstrous enough, and such as in England would have passed for frightful. But all this is by the by, for as to my figure, I had so few to observe me that it was of no matter of consequence, so I say no more to that part. In this kind of figure I went my new journey, and was out 5 or 6 days. I travelled first along the seashore directly to the place where I had first brought my boat to anchor, to get up upon the rocks, and having no boat now to take care of, I went over the land a nearer way to the same height that I was upon before, when looking forward to the point of the rocks which lay out, and which I was obliged to double with my boat, as is said above. I was surprised to see the sea all smooth and quiet, no rippling, no motion, no current, any more than there than in any other places. I was at a strange loss to understand this, and resolved to spend some time in observing it, to see if nothing from the sets of the tide had occasioned it. But I was presently convinced that the tide of ebb setting from the west, and joining with the current of waters from some great river on the shore, must be the occasion of this current, and that according as the wind blew more forcibly from the west or from the north, this current came nearer or went farther from the shore. For waiting thereabouts till evening, I went up to the rock again, and then the tide of ebb being made, I plainly saw the current again as before, only that it ran farther off, being near half a league from the shore. Whereas in my case it set close upon the shore, and hurried me and my canoe along with it, which at another time it would not have done. And hurried me and my canoe along with it, which at another time it would not have done. This observation convinced me that I had nothing to do but to observe the ebbing and flowing of the tide, and I might very easily bring my boat about the island again. But when I began to think of putting it into practice, I had such a terror upon my spirit of the remembrance of the danger I had been in, that I could not think of it again with any patience. But on the contrary, I took up another resolution, which was more safe, though more laborious, and this was that I would build, or rather make me, another canoe, and so have one for one side of the island and one for the other. You are to understand that now I had, as I may call it, 2 plantations in the island, one my little fortification or tent with the wall about it under the rock, and the cave behind me, which by this time I enlarged into several apartments or caves, one within another. Of these, which was the driest and largest, and had a door out beyond my wall or fortification, that is to say, beyond where my wall joined to the rock, was all filled up with large earthen pots, and with 14 or 15 great baskets, which would hold 5 or 6 bushels each, and where I laid up my stores, especially my corn, some in the ear cut off short from the straw, and the other rubbed out with my hand. As for my wall, made as before, with long stakes or piles, these piles grew all like trees, and were by this time grown so big and spread so very much that there was not the least appearance to anyone's view of my habitation behind them. Near this dwelling of mine, but a little farther within the lands and upon lower ground, lay my 2 pieces of corn ground, which I kept duly cultivated and sown, and which duly yielded me their harvest in its season. And whenever I had occasion for more corn, I had more land adjoining as fit as that. Besides this, I had my country seat. I like that he calls it a country seat. It sounds very prestigious. Besides this, I had my country seat, and I had now a tolerable plantation there also. For first I had my little bower, as I called it, which I kept in repair, that is to say, I kept the hedge which circled it constantly fitted up to its usual height, and the ladder standing always in the inside. I kept the trees, which at first were no more than my stakes, but were now grown very firm and tall. I kept them always so cut that they might spread and grow thick and wild, and make the more agreeable shade, which they did effectually to my mind. In the middle of this I had my tent always standing, being a piece of sail spread over poles set up for that purpose, which never wanted any repair or renewing, and under this I had made me a couch, with the skins of the creatures I had killed, and with other soft things, and a blanket laid on them, such as belonged to our sea bedding, which I had saved, and a great watch coat to cover me, and here, whenever I had occasion to be absent from my chief seat, I took up my country habitation. Adjoining to this, I had my enclosures for my goats, and as I had taken an inconceivable deal of pains to fence and enclose this ground, so I was so concerned to see it kept entire, lest the goats should break through, that I never left off till with infinite labor I had stuck the outside of the hedge so full of small stakes and so near to one another that it was rather a pale than a hedge, and there was scarce room to put a hand between them, which afterwards, when those stakes grew as they all did in the next rainy season, made the enclosure strong like a wall, indeed stronger than any wall, which is interesting. This will testify that I was not idle, and that I spared no pains to bring to pass whatever appeared necessary for my comfortable support. For I considered the keeping up of a breed of tame creatures thus at my hand would be a living source of flesh, milk, butter, and cheese for me as long as I lived in the place, if it were to be 40 years. And that keeping them in my reach depended entirely upon my perfecting my enclosures to such a degree that I might be sure of keeping them together. In this place I also had my grapes growing, which I principally depended on for my winter source of raisins, which I never failed to preserve very carefully as the best and most agreeable dainty of my whole diet. And indeed they were not agreeable only, but medicinal, wholesome, nourishing, and refreshing to the last degree. As this was also about halfway between my other habitation and the place where I had laid up my boat, I generally stayed and lay here in my way thither, for I used frequently to visit my boat, and I kept all things about or belonging to her in very good order. Sometimes I went out in her to divert myself, but no more hazardous voyages would I go, nor scarce ever above a stone's cast or two from the shore. I was so apprehensive of being hurried out of my knowledge again by the currents or winds or any other accident. But now I came to a new scene of my life. We will see that new scene in chapter 8. And finally a note, he talks about making butter and cheese out of the goat's milk. The cheese would be a soft cheese like a feta. However, unlike feta and most cheeses that we have today, it would not have been salted because I don't think he had the ocean. He never talks, at least in our abridged version, of doing anything to secure salt. So it's been a while since I've read the full version in close detail. I've just been skimming it. I might have to look into that because I don't know whether he flavors his food with any salt from the sea or any other kind of herbs at all, or whether he eats it more as just bland. I mean, and stereotypically British food is bland anyways, so maybe he doesn't miss flavors. Okay. We will be back again for chapter 8. A new adventure and a new discovery, I believe.